They used my name to borrow $520,000, then called me a traitor in front of all the guests. My father said that at the 40th anniversary celebration of the Whitaker and Sons furniture store, just as I stepped onto the stage to raise a toast in his honor. He held the microphone. He said I had signed a $520,000 loan to save the family. He said I was planning to run from responsibility. The entire room went silent. The people who had watched me grow up now looked at me like I had stolen something. I don't remember signing that loan, but the signature on the documents is mine. People always say, blood never turns its back on blood. But what if blood uses your name to cover their own holes? Before I go on, where are you listening from? Cold Wisconsin, sunny Florida, your kitchen, your familiar armchair? Leave a comment and let me know if this story makes you curious or you see yourself in it. Hit like and subscribe and stay until the end of the video, because that night wasn't just humiliation. It was the moment I decided I would never be the scapegoat again. The chandelier in the banquet hall cast golden light over dark suits. Crystal glasses clinked softly, then fell silent. My father placed a file on the oak podium, the same one I had stood behind when I gave my college graduation speech. He said I had signed willingly last year when the store was on the brink of bankruptcy. He said I understood the risks and agreed to carry the responsibility for the family. My eyes stopped at the signing date, October 14th. That day, I was in Denver's 1,000 miles away. Snow covered the hotel white, and I was texting my mother happy birthday. My mother stood beside my father, her hand gripping her familiar pearl necklace. She wouldn't look at me. Caleb stepped up behind him, gray suit, new tie. My father placed a hand on his shoulder like he was passing down the whole store. A small gesture, but enough for the entire town to understand who had been chosen. I stepped closer and flipped to the last page. The slanted signature, the long tail stroke. It looked like mine. Too much like mine. I took the microphone. My hand didn't shake. If I signed, I said, my voice loud enough to echo against the wooden wall, then you must have the security footage from that day, right? A few soft gasps. Caleb looked down. My father didn't answer. He only said I was making everything worse. I set the microphone down. No more arguing. I walked out of the banquet hall, passing the large sign that read Whitaker and Sons since 1983. The glass door closed behind me, reflecting my face in the streetlights. I left the hall, the cold wind off Lake Geneva hitting my face. I didn't need to recheck the documents. I knew exactly where I had been that day. In my mind, an old folder appeared in my personal email, something I had saved last year because of a data entry mistake by a secretary. I didn't know that small mistake would become the rope that pulled me out of this noose. That night, I didn't go back to my parents' house. I went to my small apartment overlooking Lake Geneva and opened my laptop after midnight. The copy of the email I had kept sat in an old folder from a year ago. I pulled it up and zoomed in on the attachment. Sent time 10:42 a.m., October 14th. I reopened my bank work calendar. October 14th, I was in Denver, flight ticket, hotel receipt, conference confirmation email, all there. I took screenshots of each item and saved them in a new folder. Numbers don't lie, neither does time. The $520,000 loan was approved at 11:17 p.m. the same day. 11 minutes after the file was completed, the money was transferred. Not to the main Whitaker and Sons account. It went through an intermediary account first. I traced the transaction code in the email. A long string of numbers appeared. The lookup system displayed a name, Caleb Whitaker, my brother, the one who had just stood behind my father in that perfectly pressed gray suit. I read it twice to make sure I wasn't mistaken. The account had been opened 6 months before the loan appeared. The balance before that was almost zero. After the night of October 14th, $520,000 went in, then transferred to the company minutes later. My phone buzzed. Caleb, he didn't circle around it. His voice was low, hoarse, like he had been sitting there all night. You think I had a choice? I didn't answer right away. Outside the window, the lake was black, the wind moving the curtains slightly. You signed that account, I said. I signed what Dad told me to sign. The silence between us lasted longer than words. He said the store had been losing money every week back then. Suppliers demanded payment. Employees were waiting for paychecks. Dad said they just needed to borrow my name, temporarily, and everything would stabilize. I remembered my senior year of college when the store was empty after a harsh winter. I worked part-time at a cafe, sending money home every month without telling anyone except Mom. Back then, I thought I was helping the family stay afloat. Now I stared at the $520,000 figure on the screen and saw the price of silence. I was scared of losing the store, Caleb said quietly. And what were you more scared of losing? I asked. He didn't answer. I closed the laptop. I didn't file a lawsuit. Not yet. An intermediary account doesn't exist on its own without someone approving it from above. The picture was still missing a piece. That night, I understood one thing. The day I signed that loan, I wasn't there. But someone decided I needed to be there in their place. I had a vague idea who the approver behind it might be, but the truth was worse than that. Do you want to know who that person was and why they did it? Comment continue, and I'll reveal it next. The next morning, just as I set my coffee down at my desk at the Milwaukee bank branch, the head of human resources called me into the small conference room on the second floor. The glass room overlooked the parking lot covered in thin fog. She placed an envelope with the internal logo in front of me. We received a complaint, she said evenly. It involves a conflict of interest between you and a business loan in Lake Geneva. I opened the envelope, a printed anonymous email. Bold line, Isla Whitaker is directly involved in the $520,000 loan, potentially posing a reputational risk to the bank. Sent last night. No need to guess who. I was placed on temporary suspension for internal investigation. My access badge was deactivated at my desk. A coworker looked at me through the glass wall, eyes shifting away as I packed up my laptop. Everything happened neatly, coldly. My phone buzzed as I stepped outside the building. He didn't ask if I was okay. He said I was making the family lose face. He said rumors spread faster than I thought. He said I should stop before things went out of control. You're destroying the Whitaker reputation, he concluded. I stood in the parking lot, October wind brushing my coat collar. In that moment, I stood there empty. On one side, the career I had built. On the other, my family. In your opinion, should I have filed a lawsuit immediately or stayed silent to gather more evidence? If it were you, what would you do? Which reputation is in my name? I replied. There was a short silence on the other end. Then he hung up. Some empires are built with oak, others are built on the endurance of the overlooked child. That afternoon, I drove back to Lake Geneva, not to my parents' house. I stopped at a law office 3 blocks from the store. An old brass sign. Glass door slightly scratched near the handle. I placed the file on Mr. Mitchell's desk and briefly told him what happened. He listened without interrupting, flipping through each page, marking the numbers. When they accuse you first, he said, that's isolation. Once you're isolated, they'll force you to compromise. I nodded. The shock from the night before was gone. What remained was the feeling of being pushed into a corner I never chose. I signed the legal service agreement right there. This time my signature was clear, the ink barely dry. When I stepped outside, the Whitaker and Sons store bell rang across the street. Through the glass, I saw my father talking to a customer like nothing had happened. The store lights were still on, and I had just been locked out of the place I worked for 4 years. Silence began to spread, but this time it didn't belong to me. Mr. Mitchell called me back the next afternoon. On his desk was a copy of the loan file extracted from the lending bank. He didn't say much, he just turned the computer screen toward me. This process, he tapped the timeline, was approved in 11 minutes. I looked at the numbers. 11:06 p.m., file submitted. 11:17 p.m. Funds dispersed through the intermediary account. 11 minutes. How long does it usually take? I asked. 48 hours minimum. Sometimes longer. A chill ran down my spine, not because of the money, because of the speed. 11 minutes is enough to do something before anyone can ask questions. The approver's name appeared at the bottom of the file, Henry Lawson, member of the Regional Credit Committee, and the man who had gone fishing with my father every summer for 20 years. I leaned back in my chair. No one signs that fast without arrangement. On the wall of the Whitaker store hangs an old clock, the glass slightly scratched on the right edge. I had stared at it my whole childhood, every time I helped my father close up. That night when I left the party, the hour hand pointed exactly to 11:17. Now I looked at a photo on my phone from the anniversary. The clock was still frozen at that number. Dead battery. No one changed it. 11 minutes, 11:17. The number kept repeating. Mr. Mitchell pulled his chair closer. If you want to protect yourself, you need to bring this to light before they build another story. I nodded. I didn't write a long letter. I drafted a single email to the entire Whitaker & Sons board of shareholders, including Henry Lawson. Attached a PDF titled Timeline, October 14th, 11 minutes. My finger paused over the send button for a brief second. Then I pressed it. About 15 minutes later, my phone rang. Unknown number, a deep, measured voice on the other end. Isla, this is Harrison Cole. We need to talk. Privately. Mr. Harrison is the largest shareholder after my family. He had never called me before. I looked out the window. The lake was calm, as if nothing was about to happen. But when a man like Harrison Cole calls first, it's not out of curiosity. It's because he has seen what I sent. Harrison Cole's office was on the second floor of an old oak building overlooking the marina. The smell of polished wood and dark roasted coffee filled the air. He didn't hold my handshake long, just a slight nod, motioning for me to sit. I've been waiting for someone to question those 11 minutes, he said directly. On his desk was a thin file. He opened to a page printed from the lending bank's internal system. My signature was enlarged. In the upper right corner were signs of digital editing, layers of ink overlapping, tiny jagged edges. This signature wasn't signed in person, he said. It was scanned from an old document. Harrison leaned back. I suspected from the beginning, but when your family insisted you agreed, I couldn't interfere without proof. I looked down at the enlarged image again. The final tailstroke was mine, but it belonged to an employment contract I signed 3 years ago. I still remember that morning, bringing a box of donuts to the store to celebrate my first contract at the bank. There's one more thing, he said, voice slower. Your mother was present at that meeting. I looked up. He didn't say more, just pushed the meeting minutes toward me. My mother's name was on the third line. On the drive back, wind from the lake hit the car windows. I turned into my parents' house without notice. My mother was in the living room, the pearl necklace still around her neck. She looked at me, not surprised. Why were you there? I asked. She didn't deny it, no detours. I wanted the family to survive. The sentence fell into the room like something heavy. I stepped closer. Survive how? Using my name? She looked down at her hands. The pearls touched softly. Your father thought it was the only way. For a moment, I saw her not as an accomplice, but as someone who chose silence. But silence has a cost. I'm not a loss on a balance sheet, I said slowly. I'm the signature they used. She looked up. For the first time, her eyes met mine directly. That night, I called my father. You have 24 hours to disclose the misconduct to the board yourself, I said, or I will. On the other end, only heavy breathing. I set the phone down on the table, no longer the girl standing on the edge of a party. The living room clock read 10:53 p.m. I watched the minute hand move slowly. This time, I wouldn't let it stop at 11:17. 24 hours passed faster than I expected. My father disclosed nothing. No email, no internal notice, not a single line of acknowledgement. The next morning, the large Whitaker and Sons conference room was packed. A long wooden table, leather chairs, windows looking straight out at the lake. Familiar faces, shareholders, managers, a few longtime partners, sat in silence as my father walked in. He wore a dark navy suit, a perfectly straight tie like every other important meeting. I called this meeting to put an end to the rumors, Moish. He began, "My daughter is creating a serious misunderstanding about a financial decision she herself signed." He didn't look at me when he said it. I sat at the far end of the table. My laptop was already open. Mr. Harrison was to my left. Caleb sat across from me, hands clasped together. My father denied altering the signature, denied routing the money through an intermediary account. He said everything followed procedure. He said I was throwing everything into chaos because of my personal ego. I stood up, without asking permission. The large screen at the end of the room lit up as I plugged in the cable. The first file on the screen was an internal email dated October 12th, 2 days before the loan. Subject line, rescan Isla's employment contract, urgent. Sender, the store's administrative assistant. Recipient, my father. I scrolled down. A screenshot showed the signature layer separated from the old contract. The cursor stopped right on the jagged edge. "This is my signature," I said evenly, "but it's not from the loan." My father stepped forward one pace. "You're blowing this out of proportion. That's just 11 minutes, I cut in, switching to the next slide. The timeline from 11:06 p.m. to 11:17 p.m. was clear on the screen. A $500,000 loan approved in 11 minutes by your close friend. Whispers rose around the room. Mr. Harrison leaned forward. "I'm not asking for money," I said, looking my father straight in the eye. "I'm asking for my name back." Caleb shot to his feet. His chair scraped hard across the floor. He looked around and then said, his voice shaking but clear, "Dad said she'd understand. Dad said it was only temporary. I didn't want to lose the store." The moment Caleb broke down and confessed everything. "How do you feel about him? Leave an emoji that shows how you feel about this brother." The words dropped into the middle of the room. No one cut him off. My father turned to Caleb, his eyes darkening, but it was too late. Mr. Harrison stood up, decisive. "This loan will be suspended for immediate investigation." I looked at the wall clock behind the meeting room. The minute hand moved slowly forward. It didn't stop. For the first time, I saw my father was no longer the only one controlling that room. The meeting ended without a single handshake. The board held a closed vote that same afternoon. My father was forced to step down from his executive role until the investigation is complete. The way they wrote it in the minutes sounded polite, but everyone understood it was a forced retreat. News spread faster than I expected. Whitaker and Sons' internal stock dropped by nearly 30% in just 2 days. A few suppliers called, demanding contract reconfirmations. The store stayed open, the lights stayed on, but the atmosphere changed. Employees spoke more quietly. Customers looked toward the register with wary eyes. My father didn't call me. My mother did. She didn't blame me. She only said the store was struggling because of unnecessary turbulence. Her voice sounded more exhausted than angry. That night, I stopped by the house. The door wasn't locked. The living room was darker than usual. My mother sat in the armchair, her pearl necklace laid out on the table in front of her. For the first time I saw she had taken it off. She held each bead as if she were counting back the years. "Your father built this store with everything he had," she said softly. "And me?" I asked. She didn't answer. I stepped out onto the front porch. From there, I could see the storefront at the end of the street, the Whitaker and Sons sign tilted slightly to the left from last fall's storm. Every summer in high school, I stood behind the register, dusting the wooden shelves, listening to my father talk about loyal customers. I used to think I would inherit it, Wind moved through the maple trees, leaves falling in scattered drifts onto the sidewalk. The store was still there. It's just that the people inside had changed. I wondered what I wanted: justice or a family still intact. The next morning, Attorney Mitchell sent me a list of steps we could take if we pursued criminal charges: forging a signature, credit fraud, conspiracy. The penalties could be large, the sentence could be severe. I read everything. Then I set the papers down. "We stop at civil investigation," I told him on the phone. "I don't want my father in criminal court. A lot of people say I'm too soft for not taking my father to criminal court after what he did, but others say it's my last act of mercy. Do you think I was right or wrong? Tell me what you think." He paused. "Are you sure?" I looked out at the lake. The water was calm, like it had never known waves. I didn't need a sentence. I needed my name to be clean. The store lost value. My father lost the executive seat. But my family was still standing, fragile but not completely shattered. And I knew this choice wouldn't make anything easier. A week after that meeting, I sat back down in front of my computer, not to defend myself this time. I sent the full file on the 11-minute process to the Regional Oversight Board of the lending bank. No accusations attached. Just a request to review the abnormal approval process and possible credit ethics violations. 2 days later, an internal notice was issued. Henry Lawson was temporarily suspended from the credit committee during the investigation. One short line. Not many words, but enough for people in the industry to understand. I didn't call my father to tell him. He didn't call me either. Whitaker and Sons held the next shareholder meeting in a much more cautious atmosphere. Mr. Harrison proposed restructuring the executive board. A few people looked toward me. There was a suggestion I return to take a management role to stabilize the image. I stood up, no projector, no documents. "I won't build on a forged signature," I said. It wasn't loud, but it cut through the room in a clean, unmistakable line. I didn't need a title to prove I was right. I needed distance. 3 days later, Attorney Mitchell sent me a copy of a new document filed with the board. My father signed a statement acknowledging a procedural violation and taking primary responsibility for reusing my old signature to complete the file. Caleb's name was not included in the responsibility section. I read every line again. Short, clean, no excuses. Caleb called me that night. His voice wasn't defensive anymore. "Dad said if he had to choose between us, he'd choose me," he said. "He signed so I wouldn't be prosecuted." I stayed silent. Some actions can't be undone, but some choices show what's still left. "You should decide the rest of your life for yourself," I said, "not based on who shielded you." After I hung up, I sat alone in my apartment. I didn't feel triumphant. I just felt things had shifted out of their old place. The next afternoon, I found a handwritten envelope slipped under my door. My mother's handwriting. The ink leaned slightly to the right, familiar from the Christmas cards she had sent for years. I picked it up, feeling the paper was thicker than usual. Inside wasn't just a letter. Inside the envelope was a letter folded into thirds and a small velvet box. I set everything on the table and washed my hands before opening it. Not because I was afraid of dirt. I just needed a few more seconds. My mother's handwriting stretched across 2 cream-colored pages. She didn't justify herself. She didn't blame my father. She didn't mention shareholders or the loan. She wrote that for 40 years, the store had been the only thing she believed could keep the family under one roof. She wrote that she had been more afraid of losing the store than losing me. That line sat in the middle of the page, not underlined, not emphasized. But it weighed more than everything else. My hands trembled slightly as I opened the velvet box. The pearl necklace lay inside, each bead neatly aligned, its light soft under the kitchen lamp. I had seen it around her neck my entire childhood, at grand openings, at my graduation, even on the night of the 40th anniversary. She didn't write, "I'm sorry." She only wrote, "If there's anything I can give back to you, it's the right to choose." I sat down, the pearl necklace resting in my palm. The beads were cool against my skin. I remembered the first time she let me try it on when I was 15, standing in my bedroom mirror. She said one day I would understand its value. Now I did, just not the way she meant. My phone buzzed, a text from my mother. "Did you get it?" I didn't answer right away. I didn't drive home that night. I didn't stand at the familiar living room door. I stayed in my apartment, placing the necklace on the table beside my laptop. It was no longer a symbol of family power. It was a memory. The next morning, I texted back one short line. I got it. Between my mother and me, there was no hug, no long conversation explaining everything, no tears or promises to change. Just enough distance for both of us to know that something had been hurt and couldn't be repaired right away. The pearl necklace has been in my desk drawer ever since, not to wear, not to display, just to remind me that some choices are made out of fear, and some people have to learn how to stand even when they aren't chosen. This pearl necklace is the only keepsake I kept from my family. What about you? Do you have a keepsake tied to a painful memory that still helped you grow up? Share it in the comments. I didn't go back home, not right now, and maybe that's the closest to reconciliation I can accept. 3 months after that meeting, I accepted a transfer to headquarters in Chicago. The new office overlooked the river, completely different from the quiet lake in Lake Geneva. I packed up my small apartment on a pale, sunny afternoon, placing the pearl necklace in its own box, separate from my other jewelry. Whitaker and Sons stayed open. I know because Mr. Harrison occasionally sent shareholder reports. Revenue dropped, then gradually stabilized. My father no longer held the executive role. Caleb took on a temporary role under tighter oversight. The store didn't collapse, but it wasn't the same, no longer a fortress where no one was allowed to ask questions. I didn't go back to take a management job. I didn't stand behind the register again. My name was removed from the loan. My credit file was restored. I kept that. I didn't keep the old role. Some nights in Chicago, I look out the window and watch the cars crossing the bridge like continuous streams of light. I think about Lake Geneva, about the storefront, about the clock that once stopped at 11:17. Nothing is in its old place anymore, and neither am I. I don't hate my parents. The anger settled into a distance that's just enough. I understand that boundaries don't appear on their own. They have to be drawn, sometimes with choices that make your heart feel heavier. The price I paid wasn't money. It was a distance that can't be filled overnight. Quiet dinners when I visit, conversations that stop halfway through. But I'm not a signature anyone can use when they need it anymore. And for me, that's enough. This story is fictional, inspired by real-life family and financial conflicts. The content is supported by AI and edited by humans to offer reflection and emotional value. It does not encourage anyone to copy the actions in the story. If there's one gift I can give you, it's this. Read carefully everything you sign, and listen to your instincts when something feels off. If you stayed until here, thank you from the bottom of my heart. What state are you listening from? Wisconsin, Arizona, New York, or somewhere I've never set foot in? Leave a comment so I can see how far this story has traveled. If this story touched you, hit like, because sometimes a small click helps someone out there feel less alone. And if you want to hear more stories about family, boundaries, and truth, subscribe and turn on notifications. We're not just watching videos, we're listening to each other.